Take a look at example 2. It says find each sum, write in simplest form. So in our problem, we have negative 5/6 plus 1/8. We need to find the least common denominator. So the first question I ask is, does the smaller one divide into the larger one? Well, it doesn't. So the second question I ask is there a number that divides equally into 6 and 8? And yes, there is. So I can find my least common denominator by dividing 6 and 8 by their greatest common factor of 2. 2 goes into 6 3 times. 2 goes into 8 4 times. So since 3 and 4 do not have a common factor, I will now multiply 2 times 3 times 4 to get my least common denominator. And my least common denominator is 24. So I will rewrite my fractions. And noticing that integer rules are going to come into play now because I have a negative and a positive up here. I want to think, what am I going to do when I have different signs? Hopefully you're saying that you're going to subtract those two fractions. Well, I want to hopefully have the larger fraction on top when I do that. Negative 5/6 is less than negative 1/2, but looks bigger than negative 1/2. And 1/8 is going to be less than 1/2. So I'm going to put the negative 5/6 on top because that's going to allow me to subtract the easiest. And I'm going to put the positive 1/8 on the bottom. Remembering that my greatest common or least common denominator is 24, I'm going to multiply 5 and 6 by 4, and I'm going to multiply 1 and 8 by 3. This is going to give me negative 20 over 24 on the top, and it's going to give me 3 over 24 on the bottom. Since I have different signs, I'm going to subtract 20 and 3, and that gives me 17. My larger looking number was the negative, so I'm going to put the negative sign down here, and 24 on the bottom. Since 17 is a prime number, I know that this is not going to simplify. So I can say negative 5/6 plus 1/8 is equal to negative 17/24. In problem B here, not only do we have to worry about the negatives, we also have a mixed number to worry about. So first thing I'm going to do is, as always, get rid of double signs. A positive negative is going to become a negative, and I'm going to rewrite this as negative 3/10 and negative 5 3/4. I need to find a common denominator, so I ask my questions. Does the smaller denominator divide into the bigger denominator? And 4 does not go into 10 equally, so I would say no. Second question, is there a greatest common factor for 10 and 4? And the answer to that question is yes. 2 will go both into 10 and 4. So I am going to find my least common denominator by dividing 10 and 4 by the greatest common factor of 2. 2 goes into 10 5 times. 2 goes into 4 2 times. Since there isn't a factor of 5 and 2, I can now multiply these three numbers together to get my least common denominator. 2 times 5 is 10, times 2 is 20. So the least common denominator in this problem is going to be 20. Let's rewrite our problem. Since both are negative, it doesn't matter what order I put them in because I'm going to add, but let's get in the habit of trying to put the larger looking fraction on top. And in this case, negative 5 3/4, having a whole integer as part of it, is going to be larger. So negative 5 3/4 on top and negative 3/10 on the bottom. The least common denominator of those two fractions is 20, so I will multiply 3 and 4 by 5, and I will multiply 3 and 10 times 2. That will give me negative 5 and 15 twentieths on the top, and it will give me negative 6 twentieths on the bottom. As I said before, these are both negative, which means we are going to add them. When I add them, I get 15 plus 6, which is 21 over 20. And I get my negative 5. Well, that gives me a mixed number, but it also gives me an improper fraction. I have to take care of that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide 20 into 21. It's going to go one time. I'm going to carry that 1 over to my whole numbers place, which is going to give me a total of negative 6. Since 1 times 20 is 20, and I subtract that from 21, I get 1 left over. That becomes my new numerator, and 20 remains my denominator. So we can say that negative 3/10 plus negative 5 3/4 is equal to negative 6 1/20. Why don't you take an opportunity to try these 3 problems down here, 2A, 2B, and 2C. Subtracting unlike fractions. Well, the rules are the same for subtracting unlike fractions as they are for adding unlike fractions. So let's just take a look at the examples that they have here and see if we find any differences. It says 3/8 minus 3/4. Again, we're going to ask, will the smaller denominator divide equally into the larger denominator? In this case, the answer is yes, which makes this simpler. It's because the least common multiple is going to be the larger of the two denominators. It's going to be 8. So we can rewrite this problem with our fractions being over 8. Now, again, looking at the signs, I'm going, okay, one's positive, one's negative. That means I'm going to subtract. Which of these two fractions looks bigger? Because I want to put the bigger looking one on the top. Well, at first, the 3/8 may look bigger because it's got bigger numbers. But if you look, 3 is less than half of 8, where 3 is more than half of 4. So actually, negative 3/4 is going to look bigger than negative 3 or positive 3/8 once we get them over a common denominator. So I'm going to write my fractions this way so that the larger looking one is on top. Since 8 is my least common multiple, I'm going to multiply the negative 3/4 by 2 over 2. This is going to give me negative 6 over 8. Since 3/8 already is over our common denominator, I can just drag it over. Since my signs are different, I'm going to subtract to get my answer. 6 minus 3 is 3. The denominator does not change. And then I need to take the sign of the bigger looking number because I subtracted. Having put the bigger looking number up on top, I know that it is negative. Since I cannot simplify, that means I am done with this problem. Example 3b says 9 3/5 minus 7 2/3. Again, I can see that we're going to be subtracting on this, but it's much easier to tell which one is the larger looking fraction because 9 is greater than 7. So we have a larger whole number in letter B. So that one's easier to position those fractions. Let's find the common denominator. 5 and 3. Well, 3 does not divide into 5, so it's not going to be 5. there's not a common factor for 5 and 3. And so we're just going to take those two denominators and multiply them together. So what is 5 times 3? It's 15. So our least common multiple for this problem will be 15. Different signs, we're going to line them up. Larger looking number on top, 9 and 3/5. Smaller looking number on the bottom, -7 and 2/3. We're going to turn our fractions into fractions with common denominator by multiplying 3/5 by 3 over 3. We're going to multiply 2/3 by 5 over 5. We're going to get positive 9 and 9/15 as our top fraction. We're going to get -7 and 10/15 as our second fraction. Well, we have a problem. You cannot subtract 9 minus 10 in this problem. Double checking that I do have the larger mixed number on top, and I do, that means I'm going to have to borrow. I need to borrow from this 9, leaving an 8, and then adding that 1 that I borrowed to 9/15 in the form of a fraction equal to 1. And that fraction is going to be 15 over 15 because I have to have a common denominator. So I will add 15/15 to 9/15, giving me 8 and 24/15 on top. And then I'm just going to drag my -7 and 10/15 over. Now that I've borrowed successfully, I can subtract my fractions, 24 minus 10, and get 14 over 15. And I can subtract my whole numbers, 8 minus 7, get 1. The larger looking number on top was positive, so the answer is positive. So I can say that 9 and 3/5 minus 7 and 2/3 is equal to 1 and 14/15. That brings us to letters 3A, 3B, and 3C. Why don't you give those a try now?